When we came up with this index thing, I think I'm the most excited. Because finally we get to measure. You know, most of the time when I'm standing on an existing protocol, and it's lovely to meet you, ma'am. And so finally we get to measure. You know, because during elections, people come. I'm going to speak in such a way that everyone can understand, because we're the office of the citizen. And you see, when elections come, anybody seen those billboards of 24/7 electricity? Anybody see it come 2015? They had those billboards. And then when they do 100 days in office, 1 year in office, we get to see a painted road. And then, and then they're saying, we've done very well. And so sometimes we need to have this, what we call the report card. And that's why we have the indices. And so for the Office of the Citizen, we are the side of the pillar that demands accountability. We're the ones that demand results. We want the dividends of democracy, right? And so what we did here was to divide it into like four different modules, or what we'll call them. And so the first one is the dividends of governance. And here we are looking at the extent to which we receive the dividends of democracy. The extent to which we have good roads, the extent to which we have good schools, the extent to which we had all these wonderful things that they promise, right? And it's interesting to see that when we ask the citizens, what do you want? We did a survey, I think 2023 elections. We asked them, we said, what do you want? They said, oh, we don't want insecurity, which is good. And they said, oh, we want jobs, which is good. And when we looked at electricity, for example, you know, just 3% of them wanted electricity. You know, and so sometimes we get lost in activity and short-termism that we don't see long-term. We don't see long-term. And so when you're looking at developed countries, and they call them the more developed countries and the less developed countries, and when you're looking at the more developed countries and the less developed countries, you see that the more developed countries, they don't ask for those things because they already have them. And so why do they call them more developed? They call them more developed because they produce. So they produce. And if we're not producing, we won't have the money that we need. We won't have the jobs. We won't have all the things that we're asking for. We won't have those things because we're not producing enough. And so what we are looking at the Office of the Citizen, the first one is the tangible results. We want poverty to be reduced. We want our GDP per capita growth. I'll explain that in a minute. And then we want people to be empowered. My dear friend Bredeline, she talked about going out onto the streets yesterday. She talked about going onto the streets. And she said the first thing they had to do was what? Empowerment, right? And so we want people to be empowered, to be employed. If you look at, for example, India produces a lot. Everybody knows India produces a lot, right? I think 2024, 25, their gross, everything that they produced was about 1.3 billion. 1.3 trillion, yes, 1.3 trillion. And Switzerland also produces. And theirs was about 895 million. So one would assume that if you look at just that figure, because we're data-driven, one would assume that, oh, India is very developed because they produce a lot, right? And Switzerland, they don't produce as much as India, right? But then when you look at the population of India, who knows the population of India? 1.3 billion. And the population of Switzerland is not up to Lagos State. It's 8.9, I think it's about 8.5 million. And so by the time you divide it, you find out that what? The per capita, GDP per capita for Switzerland is about $100,000. But the GDP per capita for India is, guess how much? No. To about 3,000. So it's much less. So we need to produce more. Okay, and so those are the indexes that we'll be looking at. Next slide, please. So basically what we're saying to the government, more or less, is we're going to measure you based on what the world measures. Not just what we measure, but based on what the world measures. Based on how many jobs there are, based on what the life expectancy is, based on how many children are in school. Those are the things we're going to measure you on. We're not measuring you based on the painted road. We're measuring you based on how many roads you have built in your administration. What is the length of the road? How many? Not just fixing it. We're gonna look at not just fixing it, but how many roads do we have? How many motorable roads do we have? How much rail do we have? How many waterways do we have? How can people move from place to place securely? So those are the things that we're going to measure. And then we are also going to look at what we call the Pillar 2, which is the extent to which our citizens actively participate in the electoral process. So you find out that just a few people actually vote. I think it was Team 2 that were upstairs, and they explained how there was such a large turnout of people that collected voters' cards, but many of them don't vote. So we're going to be looking at how many people are actively engaged in voting. I'll tell us a story. I was doing a master's, and one of the classes, they told us that, in America, they always give you extra marks. So they said to us that if we wanted extra marks in this class, we had to go for a town hall. Everybody wants extra marks because you don't know what the exam is going to be like. So we went for the town hall. It was a compulsory town hall. It wasn't compulsory, but it was like, if you wanted extra marks, you have to take notes at the town hall. So I went for this town hall, and I was shocked. There were so many citizens, something like this. And they had more or less like what I would call the local government chairman sitting in front. And they were asking questions. People came prepared with questions. They were looking at the budgets, and they were asking them, why are you spending money on this? Why are you not spending money on that? I want to do this. And I was like, wow. And they gave everybody 2 minutes, 3 minutes. And somebody here we were talking earlier about the rights. And everybody came and said, it is my right to speak for these 3 minutes. And so they were enforcing their rights. And they were looking at them, and this is what they call public service. They were like public servants. There was no hovering and groveling on the ground. Everybody was like, they were sitting there, and everybody was like, no, I don't agree, do this, do that, this is what we want. And I was like, wow, this is real leadership. This is public service. This is what public service is about. And so it did two things. First of all, I realized that the private sector needs to partner. So the way we have WSG 1, 2, and 3, we all need to partner. Imagine if those lecturers didn't send us to go and collect extra marks. We wouldn't know that there was a town hall going on where we could demand our rights, right? But they said, well, how do we encourage students to make sure that they start participating in town halls? Okay, students want extra marks, right? Okay, we'll give you extra marks if you participate in this town hall, right? And so it worked. Did it work? Absolutely, it worked. And so hopefully, as we progress with our democracy, we start coming up with innovative ways to get people to force people to be in town halls and to participate. And so one thing that we're going to look at doing is to ensure that people participate. Next slide. Sorry, before we go on to that one, I'll just mention one other story quickly. I like to tell people this story because it's really interesting, and it helps to dispel the notion that I can do it by myself. I used to be one of those, we don't really need the government. Has anybody watched The Men Who Built America? Has anybody actually watched that? Yeah, and then you look at it and you go away and you say, I don't really need the government, we can do it ourselves. It doesn't really work like that. So I had someone come to me the other day and they said, there's this school in, I don't want to say the name of the state. In this state, I just went there and the children didn't have uniforms. Could you do something? And I was like, okay, let me think about it. And so I went and I said, these children. I now called them back. I said, how many kids did they say they were? They were like, I'll find out. And then I remembered something. I remembered fixed politics. I said, hang on a minute. How many children do they say they are? They're like, I'll think about it. I was like, come. What local government is that? They told me the local government. So then I went to M-Budget. And then I looked. I said, searched. I'm an active citizen, right? I searched and I found the local government. And I said, your local government chairman collects 300 million naira every single month. And you want to take out of my salary to buy these children's school? I can't compete with that. Can you compete with that? They said, no. I said, you can't continue like that. It's not sustainable. This way of, I will do it by myself, I'll call my friends, we'll have this, we'll empower people. It just makes us feel good. Doesn't change anything substantially, right? So we need to dispel that notion that we'll form groups and we'll have this foundation, that foundation, this foundation. No! Somebody's collecting 300 million every month. Can you compete with it? You have to be there. If you're there and you're the one distributing this 300 million, the children will have uniforms. The schools will be built. They would look proper. And you would hold on to your salary. Not so. Is it not a win-win? It's a win for you, a win for the children, and a win for Nigeria. So we need to what? Fix politics. I'm so happy about this report card. Finally, we have a final report card. Okay. The next one we're looking at is a percentage of citizens that can identify their representatives. Now, this is a really interesting one. When you ask anyone, what does your state House of Assembly person do? Anybody in the room? State House, oh, not federal. Your friend comes to you. I want to go to State House. What does he do every day? That's what we all say. They make laws. How they make the law. Which law did they make last year? Which one did they make last week? Which one are they making tomorrow? We don't know. It's a problem. Because after a while, like now, there's a new law that if your tinted windows, you need a permit for tinted windows. Now everybody's scrambling to the police station, and of course, probably the officer in charge is no longer there to be found. We have to start looking for him or whatever. But that's a law that somebody made, and you were not there. Do you know how many other laws they're making? You're not there. But when the law comes, you have to what? Abide by the law. But we have to start tracking those things. And so one of the things that we're going to do is know what everyone does. So that when you have an issue, you're not just figuring out and saying to yourself, oh, I wish the government, I wish this government. You need to know who in government is supposed to fix that problem, right? So that's the third one, right? Knowing education and literacy rates so that we would know exactly what everyone does. And we'll be able to track them. Next slide. And last but not the least, very quickly, it's ranking. So there's a saying that says you can't measure yourself by yourself. If I sit down and measure myself by myself, am I doing a proper job? You have to measure yourself in comparison to others. And so we need to begin to measure ourselves in comparison to the developed world. And so they won't start calling us names. And everywhere they go, they call us names. And the names are not nice, like Auntie Obi said, Dr. Obi said. They're not nice names. Very soon, those names will change. They want to come to Africa and Nigeria. But as soon as we start, measuring ourselves against global standards. And we're going to be looking at the Mo Ibrahim Index, the Phillips Consulting Index, and a couple of other global indexes like Transparency International. And on that note, I hand over to WSG2. Thank you, everyone. Okay.